In a country with weird and wild politicians like Japan, there were a few men that stand out as particularly odd. One of the most wild was an ex-Yakuza member turned politician, Hamada Koichi, typically known to his fans as just Hamako. When he was a child, Hamako was a good student and grew up wealthy. However, after his brother's death at war, his father drank and gambled away most of the family's wealth. While helping his mother working for scraps to survive, Hamako swore that he was tired of losing and that in one generation he would help get back his family's lost wealth. It might sound like the plot of a movie, but it wasn't an uncommon thing. Things in Japan were bad, and there were plenty of men looking for a fast buck. To help achieve his dreams, he tried to go to college, but soon he was swept up in vices. Rather than go to class, he started to drink and play around with women. His drinking and partying were so prolific that he really wasn't sure if he graduated or got expelled from the school. Ultimately, he found himself in an awful situation. He was headed down a path of crime. Hamako had a strong hatred for the Koreans who were trying to run the Japanese black market, and was caught up in a number of incidents, earning him the nickname the Tick of Kisazaru for his penchant of stabbing his opponents, getting off to a good start in life. Ultimately, one slashing in a tempura restaurant put him behind bars for 1 year, but he'd quickly gotten the attention of a major gang boss in the area, the head of the Inagawa Kai, Inagawa Kakuji. Inagawa would ultimately become the dominant criminal force in the wider Tokyo area. However, by the mid-1950s, he knew that Hamako didn't really enjoy the criminal life, so he suggested that he find something else to do. This is when Hamako decided that he wanted to enter politics. Inagawa introduced him to a former Class A war criminal turned political fixer and Yakuza advisor, Kodama Yoshio. Kodama was incredibly wealthy and had extensive ties to Japan's criminal underworld. In short order, Hamako was elected to the town council of his native Futsu in Chiba, but he was also made into Kodama's live-in assistant. Hamako became Kodama's personal secretary and his driver, driving him to and fro for a period of about 2 or 3 years before entering the land speculation business, where he later made a killing. In 1960, he ran for the House of Representatives in Japan's Diet, their legislature, but failed. Instead, he became an assemblyman for Chiba Prefecture before trying his hand again in 1969. Naturally, he didn't campaign normally. Instead, he made the song Moeru Hamada, or Burning Hamada, which he had played by roving propaganda trucks throughout his district. The support of Kodama Yoshio, Sasakawa Yuichi, Osono Kenji, and Machi Hisayuki also helped out. That's 2 Class A war criminals, a Zainichi Korean gang boss, and the guy who would be at the center of Japan's own Watergate. Absolutely nightmare blunt rotation. Now in the House of Representatives for Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, Hamako's reign of terror was about to begin. From the start, he was eager to buddy up with a rising star and political evil mastermind, Tanaka Kakaue, but Tanaka refused. Instead, he encouraged him to align with Kawashima Shojiro, the LDP's political boss for Chiba Prefecture. Hamako realized, apparently, that he was intended to be a spy for Tanaka inside Kawashima's faction. Now, if I sat and explained the LDP's factional system, you would get pretty bored. Essentially, the various factions inside the LDP were quite formal and not entirely ideological. Rather, they were centered around high-ranking and influential politicians like Tanaka Kakaue, who could provide cash for expenses. These factions were so formalized and normalized that most even possessed physical faction headquarters. For a few years, Hamako was a fairly uninfluential figure in the Diet, but with his big mouth, Hamako gained a reputation as a frequent heckler in the Diet, gaining the nickname Yaji Shogun, or Heckler Shogun. And then, in 1973, he joined the Seiran Kai. The Seiran Kai were a political grouping inside the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. Unlike many of the other factions, this one didn't have a formal leader or headquarters or anything like that. They were nationalist inclined and argued for a constitutional revision to remove Article 9. In fact, Hamako was one of the very few pro-nuclear weapon politicians in Japan. They also supported anti-corruption efforts and opposed Prime Minister Tanaka Kakaue's recognition of the People's Republic of China. While they didn't achieve their goals, it raised his stature in the party pretty significantly. Soon, Hamako would have the first of his rather unhinged moments, but before it could happen, a rather strange political struggle would have to play out. In 1976, Prime Minister Miki Takeo was tossed out for his reform-oriented politics, and 2 of the largest faction leaders inside the LDP, Fukuda Takeo and Ohira Masayoshi, decided to make a pact allowing Fukuda to be the prime minister and then Ohita after him. Things quickly went sour, however, with Ohita and his backer, Tanaka Kakaue, yet again Tanaka Kakaue appears, preventing Fukuda from calling an election that he had hoped would extend his collapsing cabinet. Eventually, the prime ministership was taken over by Ohita, and there was an election in 1979. The LDP lost a seat, but it was still the largest party in the country. However, in Japan, there is an odd aspect to its legislature, where a new legislature would vote for which prime minister they want. Typically, this was just a matter-of-fact thing. But without Fukuda and his supporters, Ohita was incapable of becoming the prime minister. Fukuda and his supporters attempted to block the voting for the prime minister in the Diet by building furniture barricades, but they were broken through. A second set of barricades was set up in the LDP's party HQ, and while surrounded by television cameras, the Fukuda supporters' barricade was suddenly visited by Hamako. Things very quickly got out of hand. Hamako's outburst was replayed on the Japanese news over and over again, with the Japanese public looking on with amused befuddlement. Hamako was growing in influence and power, perhaps setting himself up for a future bid at the prime ministership, if he could form a faction for himself. Ohita ended up becoming the prime minister, but died from a heart attack like 5 months later, by the way. Hamako's brief time as a rising star was also ended at around about that same time, because of a very old and very stupid mistake. You see, the 1950s are not just the era of the sock hop, the soda fountain, and the terrifying Mickey Mouse Clubhouse photos. It's also the time when Lockheed Martin started bribing the Japanese government to buy their crappy planes. It's not Boeing, at least. But this was a systemic bribery that provided funds for Japanese politicians on a regular basis for decades by the time it was discovered in the 1970s. In fact, the middleman for the deal was Hamako's old employer, Kodama Yoshio. The scandal rocked the Japanese political world, and soon corruption was the focus of every Japanese person. But by 1980, the investigation had long since been wrapped up. But hearings in the US Senate revealed that a K. Hamada was involved in the case. For some reason, Hamako went to Las Vegas and in a single night lost $4.5 million of government money while playing baccarat at the Sands. This embezzlement was subsequently covered up with the bribery money. Now, in 1980, the truth was out. Hamako resigned with a smile amid the controversy, and so ended the story of Hamada Koichi. Well, not really, because in 1983 he was immediately re-elected, so much for leaving politics, I guess. In fact, he pretty much immediately got back into controversy, and the next one was a real doozy. In 1983, the LDP's party HQ was set alight by left-wing radicals using homemade flamethrowers. As the flames burnt the building in the innermost parts of Tokyo, a number of figures arrived from the party, Hamako among them. He even went as far as to go into the building to supervise the firefighters. Suddenly, the Minister of Justice, Sumi Eisaku, appeared. Sumi had been drinking and was talking quite liberally about the incident, saying to imagine they would imitate match pump. Match pump, or machipompu, is a wasei-eigo word that means someone who causes problems and then provides the solution to them once they get out of hand. In essence, he was accusing it of being a false flag attack. Hamako immediately cold-cocked the Justice Minister. Rather than get into trouble, the Justice Minister apologized to Hamako, so make of that what you will. Strangely, Hamako only grew in influence during this period, likely as a result of his attempt at handling a rather pernicious event where a far-right group attempted to sabotage influential politician Takeshita Noboru, and around this time in 1987 became the Budget Committee's chairman. There is no overstating how important of a role this was. Being on the Budget Committee was an important task, and being its chairman, even better. In fact, it was the stepping stone to ending up in the cabinet in an important post. I can only guess as to why our lovely Hamako ended up there as chairman. Kanemaru Shin, an influential LDP politician whom Hamako was close to, helped his friend get the title. But once again, why? Predictably, things went awry real fast. In fact, it was the worst incident on the Budget Committee since Prime Minister Yoshida Shigeru accidentally cursed into a hot microphone in 1953. The first part of the story goes back to the 1930s, actually, back to the early days of the Japanese Communist Party. Two Central Committee members, Obata Tatsuo and Oizumi Kenzo, were held captive and questioned about if they were police spies or not. During his questioning, Obata Tatsuo was beaten to death, though the party claimed that Obata died of physical idiosyncrasies, whatever that means. As the head of the investigation, Miyamoto Kenji took the primary blame for the incident that was handed down a life sentence in 1935. He was released in 1945 and eventually became the head of the Japanese Communist Party. For a while, his involvement in the incident was simply ignored, forgotten really. However, in 1974, the Democratic Socialist Party's Kasuga Ikko brought the claim back to public attention, and it quickly became a continual way to pick away at Miyamoto. So naturally, when serving as the chairman of the Budget Committee, Hamako randomly decided to call Miyamoto a killer when he got into a fight with a JCP member. Things descended into absolute chaos. Now, a normally sleepy meeting went wild. Shortly thereafter, the pressure was too much, and Hamako was forced out of the chairman position after the opposition started to boycott the meeting if Hamako was chairman. Now, Hamako had proved that he was simply incapable of being in any position of responsibility whatsoever. Any hope of ending up a cabinet minister was ended, and now that he was entering his 60s without the ability to be trusted in any real leadership role, his time in politics was coming to an end. In 1990, during the general election, Hamako was attacked by some people and ended up developing a brain injury called aphasia. Essentially, it made it hard for him to understand or speak with people sometimes. The details on the attack, however, remain quite sparse, to the point where I don't really know anything other than that there had been an attack. Maybe Miyamoto Kenji did it. By 1993, Hamako had finally decided to retire from Japanese politics. Instead, there was a much more lucrative and promising career waiting for him: entertainment.
制作は新製法のプリンとした麺と野菜もシャキッと生パック。これはすごい。新生タイプのカップラーメン、すごいやつ。道産麺。
Hamako was quick to come out with a book he dictated orally entitled The 9 Politicians Who Ruined Japan. He mostly listed major LDP figures, but also included himself. How gracious. The book became a major bestseller, moving 1.5 million copies by the mid-90s. Now outside of politics, he started to appear on television even more than he did as a politician. He did commercials and appeared in dramatic roles. However, his main work in the media was as a political commentator and taranto. Taranto, or Japan's proto-influencers who existed to give opinions on various things ranging from societal issues to shoes made of chocolate. He appeared on Beat Takeshi's variety show Beat Takeshi no Terebi Takkuru quite frequently, usually when the subject of politics came up, naturally. Hamako's sometimes acerbic, but always colorful style granted him a fan base far larger than he had during his time in politics.
我々はある男に国会内部を案内してくれませんかと依頼。その男とは浜子こと元衆議院議員浜田光一さん。
By the mid-2000s, his television appearances started to slow, largely given his age and worsening health. In 2010, however, there was a bit of a legal drama he got involved in related to selling off securities that he had used as collateral for a loan. However, ultimately, his then worsening dementia gave the prosecutors pause. Before the trial could go anywhere, Hamako died of heart failure at his home on August 31st, 2012. Hamako was a rare beast back in the day, and nowadays you pretty much can't find guys like him. He wasn't exactly a good guy, oftentimes he did a better job of being the bad guy, but he had a strange sense of honor about him and was often a gentleman, especially to JSP party leader Doi Takako, who was the subject of quite a bit of heckling, usually sexist in nature. Hamako was one of the few people who refused to heckle her. In fact, one of Hamako's rules for heckling was that you weren't to heckle women politicians. Though in 2011 he also said that women who can't have children have no value. Old man moment, I guess. Hamako was a man made in the late 1940s, someone whose life was forever changed in 1945. This wasn't an uncommon thing in Japan. Even older people born after the war will look back to 1945 and how it affected them. He went from being a studious boy to following in his father's footsteps into a life of drunkenness and gambling, fettering away his life for nothing. Thankfully, I guess, Hamako went about things in a different way, becoming synonymous with the corruption and chaos of Japan's post-war politics. His dream of restoring his family's wealth was achieved. He even managed to hand over his political support base to his far more normal son. In this day and age, the legend of Hamako has dulled to some degree, given that he's been gone for over a decade now. But if you ask those over the age of 30, they will without a doubt know the legend of Hamako, Japan's craziest politician. If you liked the video, please leave a like and maybe share it with someone else who might also enjoy it. If you have a comment, feel free to leave one down below. If you liked my content a lot, you can also donate via Ko-fi or join my Patreon. Thank you for your consideration. Also, do check out my Twitch. I usually stream on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and sometimes Sundays, typically starting at around 2 p.m. EST. Right now, one game I'm playing through is Yakuza 0. Without further ado, check out this video. It's pretty good. Good stories only. Thank you.